Hello, everyone. I'm just gonna, while waiting the others, so Ken will be here shortly, as well as Julian. But I'm just gonna start with quick introduction while we're waiting for others to join us. Well, first of all, welcome everyone to this event today, Who's Blues. We're here today with our host, Sugar Brown, aka Ken Kawashima, who will be in conversation with Adam Gussow about his latest book, joined by our special guests, Elaine Bomberry, Norman Otis Richmond, and Julian Taylor. So we will take some few questions at the very end of the event around 6 p.m. So if you're watching us on Zoom, you can just drop your questions on the Q&A or on the chat box. As well as for those of you who are watching us right now on TBS Facebook page, we're gonna monitor the comment section right there. So please make sure to drop your questions there as well. I would like to just take a brief moment to acknowledge our year-round supporters, Toronto Arts Council, Ontario Arts Council, as well as Government of Canada, and would like to remind you, those who are watching us right now, that TBS is a not-for-profit charity celebrating 35th year anniversary this year. So if you would like to make a donation during these harsh times, you can just do so very easily on our website, which is www.torontobluesociety.com. And on that note, I would like to leave the virtual mic to Ken.
Oh, thank you, Uma, so much for setting all of this up, and welcome everyone to our afternoon talking about Adam Gussow's wonderful new book, Who's Blues, which I have here, right here. Very nice looking book too. And I just wanted to, I won't take up too much time because I want to pass the mic over to Adam himself and then to our other guests. I just wanted to say, I guess this event is the result of, I would say, over now 6-7 months of planning. And even before that, when I was contacted late last year, I believe, right, Adam?
I think, yeah.
Yeah, late last year to review his book, actually, and I was amazed to see him quoting me in the introduction of the book and talking about some of my work in a very in a wonderful way, and I appreciated that. But really, what happened really was, as I was reading the book, of course, I had a natural interest in the topic of the book. But then, you know, basically the Black Lives Matter movement exploded again, as we know, during the COVID situation. Floyd George, the deaths, and the whole question in politics really of blues and race became something that I think everyone could no longer avoid. You know, it was an issue that was really forced into the open in ways that had always been there, we could say, but didn't always come out. Or in any case, I thought it as a watershed moment, you know, where basically questions are coming out and we're learning how to talk about it more deeply, hopefully, more sympathetically, and not to reproduce these hatreds that seem to be so dominant today. Basically, these kind of a hate thought of white supremacy, colonial discourse, and so on, which has led to situations of questions of racial underrepresentation, or in some cases overrepresentation, right? And these are all huge questions that, as musicians as well as blues lovers, we all have to confront. I think there's no way to avoid it at this point. There's no way to run away from it. And Adam's book really, I think, for me, it was a useful book and a productive book because it opens up a certain place for us to start talking about it being what? Well, who's blues, facing up to race and the future of the music. He, of course, sets up a very, I think, powerful paradigm to look at contemporary blues, what he calls blues ideologies, where he says he'll explain more, but my quick introduction, you know, there's two kind of worlds we see polarized, he argues, two ideologies of the blues. One is black bluesism and one is blues universalism. And the question I think he's trying to get us to think about are how these two kind of camps polarize our discourse of the blues, and how he's trying, I think, to redefine somehow the blues ideology into a more international, global blues, as well as something connected to blues literature, which I think is a deeply important part of his book that should also hopefully he can talk about. So without further ado, I'd just like to introduce my friend now, Adam Gussow. Thanks for coming all the way from Mississippi.
Coming all the way from Mississippi. Yes, I'm in my campus office at the university right now, and I guess Ole Miss is about to play the South Carolina Gamecocks. But here I am in the office. So thank you. just want to say thanks to Ken, thanks to the Toronto Blues Society, thanks to my fellow panelists. And Elaine, thanks for the thing you sent me by PDF that I printed out about Rez Bluez, because I mean, you're already furthering my research. I just want to say I've learned a lot just trying to get ready for this. And so I've got sort of 6 bullet points in 10 minutes. So I'm going to try to do as quick a sketch as I can of some questions I'd like to put out there and some things that are in the book and some things that aren't in the book that could be part of a conversation. So as Ken suggested, one of the things that this book is about thinking about the way that we talk about the blues. The original title of the book was not this, Who's Blues? It was just Blues Talk, making sense of the music in a new millennium. My publisher thought that we should sort of sex up the title a little bit, make it more controversial. It's upset. I've discovered there's a handful of, I guess, white blues players and aficionados who think that it's all about kind of, I'm going to say, don't play the music. And that's not, my book doesn't really say that. It doesn't say that at all. I come at this as an empiricist. I'm interested in what people are doing, how the blues actually lives, what we mean when we say the blues. Are we talking about music? A deep music, something more than music? What are we talking about? History? What are we talking about when we use that term? What became apparent to me when I thought about the blues and the state of blues music in the world today, certainly in America, that I saw a kind of competition between slogans, a dialogue or non-dialogue, an agitated non-dialogue between slogans. On the one hand, blues is black music. On the other hand, no black, no white, just the blues. Former phrase, I make very clear at the beginning of my book that more of the truth lies on that side. But again, I'm a descriptivist, not a prescriptivist. So when one says blues is black music, one also has to make sense of the fact that in the world today, if we just look at blues as a globalized music, the people who actually play the music, listen to the music, if we sort of did a numerical count, far more non-African American, non-black people play the music, buy the music. But if blues is more than music, then actually that may not be as important as some people would have it made. But anyway, that's sort of the contemporary situation, is that it's a global music. That's number one. But I want to teach people in the course of the book how to, especially because the music is a globalized music, and there are many people coming up for whom the phrase blues is black music actually doesn't have effective content in a weird way. That's troubling to me, and I want to make sure that it does have effective content for them. And so my book spends a lot of time talking about the blues conditions in the early modern South, the Black South, out of which the music arose. That's number one. The statement, no black, no white, just the blues, I critique that. Part of what I'm doing is sort of saying, here's a problem with that. Like, if you put that on the entry to the state of Mississippi, as the Mississippi Tourism Development Authority did, sort of on a plaque, no black, no white, just the blues, but 92.5% of the people in the Blues Hall of Fame in Memphis are African American. Like, why are you erasing blackness in the service of what seems like a kind of colorblind ideology? But I do understand, and I try to help people understand what people who use that phrase, no black, no white, just the blues, think they mean by it. And I think what they mean by it is a continuation of Dr. King and John Lewis's ideology, or I guess you'd say not ideology, but beloved community. The idea that in the blues world, ideally, what we might have a place in which black and white and First Nations and Asian and people all over the world and South Americans and South Africans can all come together, and straight and gay and working class and middle class, can all come together, male and female, and can enjoy the blues together. And there's some wonderful scholarship that sort of talks about this in the Oklahoma City blues scene, for example. So I want to put those two slogans in dialogue. I want to help people understand both of them. What are my own investments here? Where am I coming from? I think stories are so important, where somebody comes into this music from. So number one is I've been teaching blues literature for more than 20 years. One of my goals here, a kind of missionary goal, and how this book began for me, was to teach the people on YouTube that I was teaching blues harmonica to. I wanted to teach. I didn't want my teaching to just be mechanistic. Here's how to make a sound. I wanted to say, where do you think those sounds come from? What kind of histories do you think are attached to them? And I used literature as a way of getting into that. So my book has a chapter on W.C. Handy, trying to understand what the problem with using the phrase the birth of the blues, but also why some people use it for good reasons. I have a chapter on Langston Hughes and all the heat that great African-American poet took, the first great blues poet, from the black middle class for displacing the blues from blues music into the world of literature, which upset a lot of people because he put some rough stuff out there in poetry. And Zora Neale Hurston, so I have a chapter on Hurston. And also a chapter on the Black Arts Movement, which in the 1960s came together with the blues revival in a weird kind of dialogue. And so Larry Neal, somebody who doesn't get enough respect as a central blues critic, is a part of my book. I've spent most of my life in the blues in interracial partnerships. My teacher was a black New Yorker named Nat Riddles, whose own teachers were Jewish guys in the Bronx and Brooklyn, but who worked with African-American performers like Odetta and Larry Johnson. He taught me, he bequeathed the music to me in a sense. He sort of said, here's how to play it. He was a very generous teacher. I want to do right by him. I spent more than 30 years in partnership with a black Mississippian who I met in Harlem, Sterling Mr. Satan McGee. Some of you may have seen a documentary called Satan and Adam. And in my book, I talk somewhat about my relationship with him, but specifically the way in which he schooled me in what I call the blues ethos, something that Larry Neal talks about, a sort of a blues philosophy of life. And so Brandon Bailey, a younger African-American harp player from Memphis, who I made a record with. And finally, somebody who came out of the woodwork when the Satan and Adam documentary came into being, who is Sterling McGee's nephew, Rod Patterson, who I've formed now a trio with. He sort of joined my blues duo. So every step I've taken in the blues has been in partnership, in mentorship to, in partnership with African-American musicians. 90% of my own journey. And that's important. I'm aware that there are musicians around, especially as blues has become globalized, who don't have that experience. So part of what I wanted to do was elaborate that experience and try to draw some lessons from it. I'm going to move quickly now because I think I'm probably already up against my hard close here. So, question, how do we talk about the blues? How do we play the blues? How do we teach the blues? How do we teach the blues to the next generation? What do we teach them? What lessons are we trying to communicate? How do we live a blues life? I'm interested, as Ken said, in the movement of the music in the course of more than 100 years, from black Southern origins, although Elaine has convinced me that the native origins of the music have to be a part of the conversation. I didn't make them, except for one sentence acknowledging that they're there and one footnote. So that's something that absolutely has to be on the table, very important. But globalization. I'm seeking a sort of richer and more productive conversation. Canada, unfortunately, was a part of the conversation a little bit in my final chapter where I look at the Edmonton Labatt's Blues Festival, and I talk in terms of racial representation, and I think about what a group out of Chicago, led by Billy Branch and others, said in critiquing that festival. And I look at their critique, and I try to say, does it have legitimacy? And one thing I found, looking at the critiques of racial representation in festivals, and they found, by the way, that it was an outlier, it was a bad outlier in terms of just leaving white harmonica players out of the picture completely. Leaving black harmonica players out and having a 6 harmonica player showcase, all white guys, all terrific players, but maybe a problem there. One thing I discovered is that the Blues Foundation in Memphis, which gives the annual Blues Music Awards, In 26 years, since 1993, has now, or it's now 27 years, an African-American player has not once received the award. Blues harmonica. So I say that's a problem. We need to think about what happens. Is that structural racism? Is it white folks who don't know other, voting for their own maybe? Is it the Blues Cruise regulars? I don't know, but I think we need to talk about that. We need to talk about, so here's one thing I'll leave you with. B.B. King, it turns out, is one of the chief mechanisms for the globalization of the blues. I'm editing an issue on blues music in transnational context. B.B. King plays 55 countries around the world. He's one of the key sites for the transmission of blues into the larger world. He plays his most gigs in the U.S. Number 2 venue for B.B. King was Canada. Number 3 was Japan. Japan needs to be a part of the conversation, and Canada needs to be a part of the conversation. I'm making a space here for y'all and for Ken. I think I need to pause there.
Yeah.
So let me pause there. That's sort of my big dump, and I'm looking forward to the conversation and learning from you guys.
Yeah, no, we'll pick you back up, Adam. I want to introduce the 3 other guests because I hurried the introduction too much, and I want to first of all introduce Otis Richmond and Elaine Bomberry, as well as Julian Taylor. All 3 of you, thank you for joining this conversation. And I'd like to ask maybe Norman Otis Richmond if you could speak for a few minutes about your reflections on Adam's book or on your own experience, and then we'll go down to Elaine and then to Julian.
All right. First of all, I would like to thank the Toronto Blues Society and the organizers of this event for inviting myself and the rest of us to speak. But the first thing I wanted to say is that one of the people that I followed most of my adult life is Archie Shepp, and one of his quotes is that it's a question of European control over African creativity. And I think that I can make that point by basically saying that in 1873, the Fifth Jubilee Singers conquered Europe. I'm talking about 1873, 1874. This is before the Berlin Conference. And we know that Europe in 2020 is not the Europe that it was in 1873. What I'm saying is that Europe now is multiracial. I mean, there's Black people, Asian people, all over Europe. But at that particular time, it was predominantly white. And the Fifth Jubilee Singers conquered. They conquered the world. Adam mentioned Langston Hughes, and Langston Hughes has a chapter on the Fifth Jubilee Singers. And the Fifth Jubilee Singers, they went to all over Europe and knocked the socks off of the people. And after that, there was your jazz situation where Duke Ellington and others. I'm getting ahead of myself, but it wasn't Paul Whiteman, but it was the other the Black. Paul Whiteman got credit, and I'm a very pretty nationalistic type of guy, but Paul Whiteman was not really an enemy of Black people. I think the critics made him the king of jazz. That wasn't necessarily his fault. But anyway, jazz conquered the world. Then you had Calypso, which was, Harry Belafonte, who did not create the genre, but he got credit, and he sold millions of records. I think the first million-selling album was Calypso by, Mr. Belafonte. And then you had the R&B thing where Otis Redding eclipsed Elvis Presley. And, then we had reggae. And today we have hip hop. Now, when I was 9 years old, my mother took me to a place called the Fox Theater. That was in Los Angeles, California. And the headliner of this show was Little Junior Parker, who was Al Green's cousin, Don and Dewey. And Don and Dewey were a couple of, one of them I think is still living, but Don and Dewey were these two pretty boys out of New Orleans, Louisiana. And also on the show was Bobby Blue Bland, and he was basically just coming out, and he was opening up for Little Junior Parker. And one of the things I remembered about the concert was that the response of Don and Dewey was the women in the audience went crazy. And I was 9 years old, but at that point I said, maybe I need to do this, because I like the way these women are responding to these two guys. And the number two thing that knocked me out was the fact that, my mother, I believe we had front row seats. I mean, she was a serious blues aficionado. And I remember my sister was very, very small because she was born premature. I was 9 years old. She was 5 years old, but she was very small. And I never will forget this as long as I live. Bobby Bland picked my little sister up and actually sang to her. And that made me a lifelong fan of Bobby Blue Bland. Now, my mother loved the blues and she loved reggae. She was, let me say, my mother was kind of a one-drop type of person. I mean, she wasn't as universal as my father. But my father, on the other hand, he liked Dinah Washington, he liked Brooke Benton, he liked Nat King Cole, and he even named my sister Lorraine after the song Sweet Lorraine. And he was a bass aficionado, and he could tell you all of the. I think it was Willie. Is it Willie Ricks was with the Ravens? I think he sang White Christmas before. The Clovers sang White Christmas before Clyde McFadden and the Drifters did. But he was my pops was a big bass aficionado, and he wanted me to sing bass, and I couldn't sing bass if my life depended on it. They would just have to assassinate me because I can't sing any lower than a second tenor. And but my father was in love with Marvin. He was in love with Marvin Gaye. He was very, 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 very eclectic. And in terms of the blues, when I came to Canada, I found that there were people here like Diana Brathwaite, who I knew her family, and there was also Harrison Kennedy. Diana Brathwaite is from someplace in Ontario. I don't think he was born in Toronto. But anyway, Diana Brathwaite and Chris Wheatley, I guess, or they are an item, and everybody knows Toronto Blues Society people know them big time. And later on, I found out, Harrison Kennedy was born in Hamilton, and he was a member of the chairman of the board, and they had the big song, Give Me Just a Little More Time, and he performed with General Norman Johnson. And I remember, I never met General, but I used to talk to him on the phone when I lived in Detroit, and he hated the name Norman, and we used to always laugh about that. But anyway, Don, I met, when I was speaking to him today, Don, I hope he's listening. Donald Ray Johnson was born in Texas, but he won a Grammy with the group A Taste of Honey, Boogie Oogie Oogie, and they had another big song. But anyway, Donald Ray is a great drummer and a great singer. And he's still in the land of the living, still doing the blues. And I saw him at the Toronto 2019. He performed at the Toronto Blues Society concert, and he performed, I think it was 269, Bye Bye Bird, I think is a correct title, about Lightning Hopkins. And I was, he invited me to come to be his guest at that particular show. And of course, Diana Brathwaite is I think she's probably going to, if she's not already, probably going to go down in the Hall of Fame for the whole blues situation. But Diana Brathwaite is a historian, and she can relate the blues to young people. She's done plays, and she's multi-talented when it comes to distributing or promoting the art form called the blues. And Canada is a spot that blues has come to Canada, and blues is a lot. What makes me laugh is that opera and a lot of other musics that come out of Europe, because they became universal, or people listen to them universally, they still maintain their roots. But for some reason, the African, especially the African American, is always thought of as being less than, and that's part of the whole.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me interrupt. We need to move on, but I noticed you're coming back full circle to your first point, which is really about, when we're talking about blues music and stuff, it has a strange and long history to European domination and control. There's no doubt. And what you've laid out, I think, really eloquently is a kind of genealogy of great black music in the U.S. Migrating to Canada. And I'm so happy to hear you mention Diana Brathwaite and Chris Whiteley and Harrison Kennedy, some of the greatest blues musicians and historians in Toronto, in Canada, with a really a history that, like your own history, coming from Louisiana to Canada and becoming a journalist and following black music in Canada. It's a history of its own that really needs to shine out and come out and come alive. And so I'm really happy you could join us and give us your thoughts on that. And I'm going to turn it over to Elaine Bomberry, who's the woman in charge of Rez Bluez, one of the greatest blues institutions, I would say, organizations in Canada. Such a amazing history already, and really focusing around Native Indigenous blues, which is so deep as we know. And I would like to thank you for coming and joining us from all the way out in BC, and we're happy to hear your thoughts on the book and your own work and the conversation that's been going on.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm coming at you from the traditional unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people here. And my husband and I live on the Squamish Reserve in North Vancouver. And we've been out here for 15 years, but we're both originally from Six Nations, which definitely we call the home of the Indigenous blues for Canada, because we just got so many amazing artists. And with regards to this conversation, I would just like to stress that all through my work, all I've been looking for is to try and get an acknowledgement of Indigenous people. We were there, we were there all over in the South, and until the Trail of Tears, when everyone got pushed west. But, there was a real interaction that happened between runaway African slaves and our Indigenous people, like the Choctaws down there, the Seminoles, a real cross-cultural exchange. And so what I've proposed, or I've learned bits of history all the way down the Mississippi, actually, from a number of different Indigenous people, and talking about those runaway African slaves and how when they were in their plantations, they weren't allowed to have their drums because the drums helped them communicate with one another. And you talk about the field holler songs and everything too, like that came from our people, the back and forth across the fields that happened. And so with the history, like how do we not know that as a result of this cross-culture exchange came the birth of the blues? Because what's the runaway slaves, where did they go? They came to our villages, they came to our camps, and so there was, again, getting back to the cross-culture exchange, the sharing of food and of home and making babies, how do we not know from this came the birth of the blues? And I've always just wanted to have that acknowledged, that was real history. It's just that it's not written down, you see. So, and I look at some of the early blues players, who had native blood, like Charlie Patton, Lowell Folsom, Muddy Waters as well, the Neville brothers, and Buffy St. Marie speaks to that very clearly. And she was, because people were trying to say that they were appropriating indigenous culture and songs and everything, but that's not true. They have indigenous blood, so that was made very clear to me. And so they've actually performed, the Neville brothers have performed at indigenous music festivals here in Canada. At Harbourfront, there was an event called Planet Indigenous, that's a long time ago. But they were there, the Neville brothers were the final act. And also my husband was invited to perform. He got to open for Etta James and B.B. King at the Tulalip Casino in Washington State, just when we moved out here. And we had friends down there, and they said, well, because it was an indigenous casino, they wanted indigenous performer to open. So Murray got that gig. And then also with his former band, the Pappy John's band, they got booked at the Chicago Blues Festival. This was by them performing at a blues summit for the Toronto Blues Society. And they were only the second Canadian band ever invited this was on their 20th anniversary of Chicago Blues Festival. And that's when Barry Dolans was the artistic director. And I had just started working on my radio doc on Rez Bluez. And so I got to meet Barry at the Blues Summit. And Murray's band got invited to perform, and Barry encouraged me to be part of a workshop much like this, talking about blues in the Jewish community, in the African American community, in our community. So that was the first time I had ever done that, do that workshop. So that became part of what, when Murray would perform at different festivals, we were able to talk about this and say, we can do a workshop on this subject. And so Murray'd have his keyboard, and then I'd have my keyboard, and we would just go back and forth. So we've been able to do that Rez Bluez workshop all the way from Haida Gwaii, that's northwest coast here, British Columbia, to Bleu sur Seine in Mantes-la-Jolie in France. And again, Murray's band got that gig by performing at the Blues Summit through the Toronto Blues Society. So they've always been so supportive, the Toronto Blues Society, over the years. We say it's a 25th celebration, but actually it's 27. It just took a couple of years to put it together. But, I'm forever grateful for them. So it's, when we bend people's ears about this subject, they go, oh, that makes sense, But again, it's just not documented. And, I strongly feel that, when people hear the blues coming from our artists, it's amazing. And you can watch them all online right now through the TBS YouTube channel. And our last week is coming up next Friday. So that'll be 8 weeks. They're half-hour performances, but what a celebration, to get the music out there. So it's a challenge, but I consider it my life's work as well, just like you, Adam, and all of you guys, right? We're lifers in the blues. And it was so wonderful too to meet Julian Taylor, and now he's Mohawk and a Black as well. So it's hi, Julian.
Yeah.
Hi, Elaine. Hi, everyone.
Yeah. So that's pretty much in a nutshell.
Yes.
What I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think it's so great. I mean, last time we talked, we also talked about the great documentary Rumble
Yes.
which really is a wonderful documentary. I saw it on the Criterion Collection, but it really gets to these, these kind of repressed questions, about the origins of the blues. I mean, it's really something that really needs more research into and so on. It's not as cut and dry when you get down to it, especially post-emancipation.
Of
After,
course.
after Civil War and into
Yeah.
Reconstruction, we get into that confluence of cultures of the fugitives, emancipated slaves and Native Indians who are facing genocidal dispossession, and the sharing of the music and becoming embodied in musicians like Charlie Patton, so on. I mean, that's so. When we think of the origins of the blues, we really can't. It's simply. I mean, for example, just last point before I turn over to Julian. I've been rereading W.E.B. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction in America, which is such an amazing book. But the Native question, it doesn't really also appear weirdly, as deeply as one would hope. But it's behind the scenes, as it were, and it's one of those histories again. Like when you look, and I speak as a historian, when you uncover history, you kind of unrepress certain histories, and then you see more histories that are repressed under that and under that and under that, and it's a process of kind of uncovering, and then we'll see that there's a very common shared source often.
Yeah. If I could just make one more point.
Yeah.
Just as you're talking about emancipation, right, and a lot of the slaves headed north, right, to Canada, and they talk about going on the Underground Railroad. What was that? They're old Indian trails. Those were our trails that helped the people, and it was the Tuscaroras who helped a lot of slaves come through. They built rafts to help them cross the Niagara River to come into Canada.
Yeah.
It's...
I mean, that's a whole history. That's such a beautiful history. I mean,
Ken, I know we got to get to Julian, but I just want to give people two quick resources. Ted Gioia's book, not Ted Gioia, but where I got a little bit of this, Joe Gioia, The Guitar in the New World, has a chapter on Native American influences on the blues. And James Dickerson, there was a book I once blurbed called The Mojo Triangle. It's hard to find, but James Dickerson talks about the bands of Choctaws. He says the idea that we could talk about a band, as in like a rock band or a blues band, comes from that. So I wouldn't know, but I'm just saying those two things. I'll try to put them in the chat. Sorry, Julian. Let me.
No problem.
Yeah, welcome, Julian. It's great to see you. Thanks for.
Nice to see you too.
Yeah, man. It's good to see you. Yeah, and hope you had a little time to reflect on this stuff. We were just dying to get your opinion on this. You're a great musician, and you seem to straddle so many different boundaries and stuff. And so I'll turn it over to you. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, to Elaine's point, I'm living proof that I'm a Black Indian. Hi. Stuff happens when people meet, so here I am, and I'm grateful for that. Nice to thank you to the Toronto Blues Society for having me, and I think my story comes really from my grandparents, my grandfather on my mom's side, who is Mohawk, and he was the one who really loved blues music a lot when I was growing up. I wasn't really a huge fan until I started to get told the folklore. As a young child, I think that's what drew me in. I mean, if Sky Woman is the creation story in Indigenous culture, in a lot of ways you could look at the Crossroads as the creation story for the blues, just from a folklore standpoint. And that really spoke to me. And that's when I started to dive into it. And what's interesting about blues music, and for me, is that I don't necessarily look at it as a genre, which is sort of where I've taken my career as well. It's like I look at the experience of being a human as the guiding light for what I write and what I produce and what I put out into the world. And to me, it's very clear that the people who didn't have or were undermined I mean, in the United States and in North America, you had colonization and you had slavery. Those are two major examples of what happened to indigenous people and to Black people right here on this continent. And the blues music and the folklore and the stories and stuff were coming from these people. And then it was exploited by European people, which is why we've got this massive conundrum and argument as to whose music is it, and who's, you know, being able to monetize it. And that's what that in lies the main problem, is that European culture, in my personal opinion, and I'm only going to speak for myself because I hate ruffling too many feathers, but I got to get past that and ruffle as many as I possibly can, is really interested in power. That's what the culture has always, and the word is dictated. They want more power. Why else would Europeans come to North America? To conquer. Why would they? And so when they heard this music that ruffles all these wonderful feelings in them, because it's soulful music, it's music from the heart, like the drum. It's music from communication, and the communication is coming from people who have been pushed down by the powerful system that wants more control. And so once that music is taken away from the actual people, it is diluted, it is commercialized, it fails to have the meaning that it used to have. And what was so important to me when, you know, speaking to my grandfather and my grandmother, who, you know, lived here and hung out with various blues musicians and jazz musicians. Dropping names is not my sort of thing, but the idea that white people took this music and made a lot of money off of it really hurt them in a deep, deep, deep way. So much so that it was almost as if the music itself, this creation, I look at jazz as one of the only true American art forms, really, because for me, it's as if blues music and European music comes together. That's the one that both can sort of claim, in my personal opinion. But when it comes to folk music and blues music and that sort of communicative, it's a language, really. It's something that I think needs to be educated. And what worries me is that because it's been so diluted, that the stories, like Elaine's story talking about the Underground Railroad, our children, you know, or my children and our children who are, you know, growing up, are they going to be interested in these stories? And I think that the one way to make them feel interested about these stories is to tell them, especially people that look like me or Elaine or Otis, that these are stories of people that struggled. And now here's the story. The folklore is really important to engage young people, because it's not necessarily, as we have the conversation about whose music it is and whatnot, we're going to lose the opportunity to tell other people that are growing up. Okay, for instance, I'll simplify it. Because Elaine brings up a really good point. Both of the cultures that I come from are oral traditions. There's not a ton of literature and not a lot of books about, you know, what really happened. So this is what we have, and we have to own that. And it's now the responsibility of white Americans or white Canadians or white Europeans to allow us to own it and help us cultivate those stories so that we can tell those stories to our children and help get them written down finally. Because I look at myself and I think to myself, wow, when I was 20 years old, I didn't want to talk about any of this stuff because I just wanted to go out and hang out and see if girls were interested in me. That's all I wanted to do. But now I'm in my 40s, and now I'm like, oh, I have a responsibility to tell my story and to tell the story that was told to me. And that's really important. And that's why I think the blues is so important. And that's why I think it needs to be claimed, because Indigenous people colonization, Black people, slavery. The songs, the folklore, through the music are our stories that have at least been what has seeped through into the world.
Yeah, man, that's amazing what you said, man. You know, I was thinking about similar things, you know, but I didn't, you know, basically I was thinking about, and I'll say a few things and then hand it back to Adam and we can get some audience questions too. But, you know, the title, Whose Blues, is a very provocative one because it implies this whole question of ownership and possession and, you know, this ridiculous situation, but it's ridiculous and not ridiculous of, you know, Black artists who have been basically alienated from the form of music that they've created, the blues. You know, it's become appropriated and it's become monetized and it hasn't been reciprocated, and especially commercially, you know. And I think about what allowed that, you know, where I think there's also a need to critique. It's also to recognize that blues at a certain very clear moment in the 20s became this vendable commodity. It became something to sell and was bought and sold. And basically I see the musicians as musician workers who get exploited by these record companies. And at the same time, it's kind of racialized. You know, they create this music and then it gets away from the Black folks who produced it, but it becomes like a commodity. It becomes legally alienated. You know, I think that's a huge economic aspect of this problem that I want to emphasize to help resonate with you, so that when we talk about like post-colonization and post-slavery, the problem is we got everything that's for sale, you know, including music now. And so that's, as a kind of an economic historian, I want to bring that up, but it's meant to corroborate, you know, what we've already tried to talk about. And I just hope that we can try to get over on the one hand, you know, thinking of it simply, blues as simply as a possession. It should be owned, I agree, but there's also, I think, on some cultural or musical level, something that I was hearing from Elaine, you know, a kind of blues as a sharing, you know, of these stories, of these experiences. But hopefully we can produce more sharing, but also rethink the whole question of ownership, you know, because when we think of, last point, you know, theft, blues theft, like people say like, oh, you stole the blues or something like that. We should really deepen what we mean by that, because the whole system really of after colonization and after slavery, it's creating a market that's actually based on the theft of the land of the native indigenous peoples. So theft is already built into the system. So we can't so simply say, oh, you stole that, you stole that. You know, Bob Dylan had made an album called Love and Theft, and I think he's on the right idea. Basically, theft is just, you know, it's so already part of things that we shouldn't get too hung up on it, but it's out of love that we also make this music and we share and love, and there's theft, but the system is based on theft anyway. So we have to recognize that and overcome some of those. I see a kind of, you know, possessiveness about it, and understandably, but hopefully we can also do that cross-cultural thing that Elaine's talking about. That's what I think is very exciting. Anyway, Adam, you want to have some words? And we should also make sure we get some, if there's any questions from the audience, we should get them in. Adam? You're muted, Adam.
Yes, thanks. I wonder if I could ask the administrators, I would love to be able to show 30 seconds of a video by Luna Lee, a South Korean YouTuber. Is it possible to make me a co-host of the event? If it's not possible, I'll just put a link in the thing. Is that possible?
Adam, you can go ahead and share your screen if you would like to.
Great. So let me do that. I'm going to share the screen, and I'd like to know what people think about this, and the audience as well. Let me. So is this visible now? Elmore James, Dust My Broom.
Yeah.
Okay. if we had more time, I'd show more, but I don't want to overdo it. Let me stop the share. So Luna Lee she's a South Korean YouTuber.
Good, awesome.
who she covers, and it's just really interesting to find interviews with her. She, for me, and so she's on Patreon. She gets $1,000 for total, sort of, for every video that she releases, and so she does the full spectrum of sort of blues rock and pop, but definitely and Stevie Ray Vaughan. And here's Elmore James. So my question, and she strikes me as one future of the blues, for better or worse. Mm-hmm. I happen to think that kind of fusion music with the gayagum, I guess it's her South Korean native kind of zither type instrument. She's doubling herself. There's no community except the one that she bodies forth as a YouTuber. So there's no sort of in-person community, but she did come to South by Southwest. Julian, is that an example? I'd love to know your thoughts about this. And you used the word dilution. I happen to think that Danielle Nicole, when she does Cry No More, is not she's a white American performer.
I don't think that it's dilution at all. That's not what I meant by it.
So how do you frame a performance like that? What do you do with that? I'm just interested.
What I loved about it, first and foremost, was that she was covering Elmore James and paying homage to that music that she obviously really loves, and to Ken's point, love and theft. And at the same time, she's using her traditional instrumentation to bring forth a new element to the medium. And what is interesting to me is it's not that, and when I said dilution, Adam, it wasn't that I meant that every time somebody plays the blues, it gets a little bit watered down. That's not what I meant. What I meant is that I firmly believe that the stories that are within the music itself are stories that were created by people that were completely disadvantaged, which is why they're such important stories. And most of these disadvantaged people, Adam, were indigenous people or black people. And certainly that's what happened in America, to create this wonderful thing that everybody loves. What's disappointing to me up until this point is that a lot of the time, because of economics and because of monetization, people have forgotten to pay homage to those stories and allow the people that created those stories to have them as their own. That's all I'm saying. She's doing that, though.
I'm going to disagree with you in one key respect, which is that she's not. There's nothing there that suggests that blues is black music. There's nothing she's projecting. She's clearly evoking Elmore James's melody. She's doing something original with it on her traditional instrument. But there's no sense. And actually, if you go and look at the interviews that she's done, it's kind of interesting. She goes, Jimi Hendrix was what sort of got her in this direction, and then Stevie Ray Vaughan. So she sort of came to it that way. But this precisely the stories, the folklore that are important for you and that are important for me, and that to the extent that black literature, not just black oral history, but black literature or autobiography should be a part of the blues conversation, my book really tries to put a lot of that out there. Almost like imagining that I'm going to educate somebody like her, for whom the phrase blues is black music may just be like coming out of left field.
Sure.
So there's no folklore is what I'm saying, behind what she's doing. It's not grounded in apprenticeship with African-American masters, for example. There's not much sense of that. She's listened to records like everybody else, I guess.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that the records themselves are the only thing that we've got. It's part of the oral history. So you have the stories that families tell each other, but now, because you have gramophones and people are able to listen to it, therein lies where the story is captured. It may not be captured on paperback or hardback on a book. It's captured within the grooves of a record now.
Okay. I like it. Ken, we should have maybe other voices. I'd love to know what Norman, Elaine.
Yeah, Elaine, or do you have any responses or some other thoughts on the conversation so far?
Yeah, I really like what you had to say there, Julian. And just listening to Luna, I got chills like all around, up my arm, right across my back. I'd never heard that before. And I thought, it's the same thing. It's we've got to look at it. It's evolved, this genre, and if we can make it our own through however, like we have a performer named Porefe who's Tuscarora, and that's her people's history of the Underground Railroad helping those slaves. She plays her blues on one of those guitars. What do you call those? Not a lap steel, Weisenborn. And then she'll also incorporate her traditional rattles as well within it. And then you hear it and you hear nothing but the blues. So I'd suggest, checking her out as well. And I'll put her link up here as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to hear more of what Luna's doing and what other people are doing to bring forth a different look on things. I think that's important. I'm not saying that white musicians didn't do that. What I'm saying is that when you acknowledge the stories and the folklore and allow us to have that as part of our heritage that's important to us, then it's amazing what you can do. I want the world to be an all-encompassing place for everybody to shine. Absolutely.
Me too. Me too. Do we have other questions, Ken? I'm thinking suddenly that we should.
Well, here's one somewhat from Jay Muna, who first of all sends to you, Adam, his condolences on the loss of Sterling McGee.
Yeah.
He said he was touched by your eulogy video. And he has a question, if I were to, it's too long to paraphrase quickly, but basically he seems to ask you if you could address the role that white Brits, Germans, Belgians, and others helped sustain and grow the interest in American blues.
I can't talk about the Belgians
and how that impacts this conversation. I mean, I don't know.
I got a quick quick takeaway in the process of researching the essay that there's this journal called The Global South, and so I basically solicited essays to put together something called Blues Music in Transnational Context. And trying to write my own essay was going to be basically trying to figure out how the blues spread, what was the process. And one totally unexpected thing came out. Sort of stage one of the process was African American artists and their records go across the seas to Europe, American Folk Blues Festival and earlier things, Lead Belly and Big Bill Broonzy in the 50s, all very important. And earlier women, Josephine Baker and others in the 20s. The second phase was really the British blues revival and what happens in England, where you have for the first time a kind of non-American blues scene achieving critical mass. And this has an incredibly important effect because a lot of the rest of the world, to the extent that they caught the blues bug, part of it I said was B.B. King, who toured internationally, 55 countries and toured a lot of places. Russia, he brought it to Russia, it was hugely important. He went to Europe. But the British blues guys, and it was specifically the Stones, Cream and Clapton, Led Zeppelin, they were for people, for other Europeans, for the Belgians, for the Germans, and then when they toured South America and other places, they sort of set a model that was certainly in competition with B.B. King, which was the blues rock model. What this meant had one critical thing. I just couldn't find much when I was thinking about blues globalization, about how women had spread the blues. And it does seem like, and I know it's out there, but it just wasn't in the sort of sources that I found. I looked at everything I could in the histories that were written about this. Far more than the women were the sort of the guy thing and the white guy thing, but also the sort of the guy thing. And I do think that when you go to, for example, Singapore, I found an essay about how the blues came to Singapore, and it was some guy at a British army base who gave this guy like a Led Zeppelin record. And it helped establish the aesthetics in the Singapore blues scene, the blues rock aesthetics. I think we have to think about that. So I actually think it's been a little invidious, a little problematic, the British blues effect around the world, which is to say it's helped prioritize the male thing, the guitar thing, rather than the blues singer, the female blues singer in front of a band thing, which I think is just as important, hugely important. Paige McGinley's book about, women in the blues, that's part of the revision of blues history that we're getting now. It's just how important the women were. They were the first blues stars. They were in Mississippi in the teens.
Brilliant.
you know, and the Charlie Pattons of the world were seeing them in these tent shows. They were seeing Ma Rainey. They were seeing Bessie Smith. So anyway, that's my thought about that.
There'd be no hound dog without Big Mama Thornton, right? You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have one thing to say that I hope you don't take this the wrong way, Adam, but
Yeah.
and I want to pose a question. When you think
Sure.
of classical music, okay, what do you think of? Do you think of classical music as being a European thing? I do. As soon as someone says it to me.
One answer is that I think of classical music as a thing and it's a thing that never really appealed to me.
That's not the question, but what?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, so to the extent that I have any ideas about it, I don't actually know a lot about European classical music. What I do know is that heavy metal guitarists were very into it.
Yeah.
But I don't think now, when you think about Christianity, do you think about a desert religion? Or do you think about South American evangelicals?
A bit of both, actually. I mean,
Well, for me, a bit of both. I think about, again, one reason it's tough for me is I think about black female opera stars.
that's the only reason I'm asking that
Yeah.
question is because
So
my dad plays classical piano. He's black. Lang Lang plays classical piano, and he's Asian. But there's never any argument, it would seem, in the world whether or not the music he's playing is an interpretation of European music.
I guess it depends. There's one thing to interpret repertoire. It's another thing to be a composer. So I actually know nothing about blues composing. So the repertoire, obviously, if it's repertoire that's from 100 or 200, 300 years ago, it stands to reason that people are thinking that somebody is doing repertoire by Bach and Vivaldi and Mozart.
Sure. Yeah.
The composition's a whole different thing. And it's hard for me to have that conversation.
That's okay. I just wanted to ask.
No, it's a great question, though. It's a great question.
People's idea of what that is, and for me, as growing up, and I think the rest of the world would probably, and I don't know, I'm just always speaking for myself, would say, oh, no, classical music originated from Europe. It's European music. But why is it so hard for people to accept that other types of music could be?
Yeah.
Could have origins. I understand what you're saying. So I have a recording out of a version of Crossroads Blues in which I took Robert Johnson's song. I translated Clapton's opening, because I play guitar too, his opening chorus to opening guitar riffs to harmonica. And then I added some verses in which I called in my own mentor, Mr. Satan, Sterling McGee. Is that music black music that I'm playing? It sounds to me like what I'm doing is precisely what any real musician should do, which is take the sources, the stuff you've got, the life you've lived, and translate it into something new and powerful, hopefully, and certainly not dilute. Now, the singing on it's not very good. I take no credit. By the way, I did some research, and I love your music, your take on music. I'm just a harmonica player who was banging on some foot drums and trying to keep up with my voice. What I would say, though, is that I'm not a fundamentalist, and I think you're talking in terms that I would talk about as fundamentalism. The same way I would with somebody who said, really, when it comes down to it, Christianity is about Jesus in the desert, and all those folks in South America who think they're, and everywhere who think they're Christians, it's not the real stuff. The real stuff has to be in that part of the world. And
well, to me, the real stuff actually is within the stories told. Like, my grandfather is a pastor. He is no longer, but he was a pastor, and he and I had a conversation about this because I didn't go to church, and I stopped going to church because I didn't want to. My other grandfather and my uncle Paul were very well versed in indigenous practice, and I wanted to go that way. Well, anyways, my grandfather, who was a Christian, said to me, look, I've read all of them, all the books, and I continue to read all of the books. So he would read about Hinduism, he would read about Buddhism and Judaism, and all of them. He just said to me that this particular story spoke to him the most. So that's really what it's about. I believe, truthfully, that the story is one story in several different ways. However, when you look at religion, the one story is being separated by all of these people, and I don't want to offend anybody, but all of these denominations have decided to go one way and tell it a different way.
Okay. Yeah, I agree.
I would also say, speaking of classical music, if anyone asked me if I know classical music, I would say, yeah, I know Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and Little Walter. That should be.
That's your religion, I know, man.
Yeah, that's gets to the point right away, I think. Otis, would you like to comment on some of these?
Oh yeah, I would like to say that the first recordings that Columbia Records recorded Caribbean music before they. The first records that I think Columbia Records recorded, were from the Caribbean, and then they recorded black women. I'm not necessarily in that order, but black men were not were the last to be able to record, and I think that had a lot to do with the fear of the black planet. And I basically wanted to say that in terms of the whole. I have Choctaw roots in my background. My grandmother, who basically probably had a huge influence on me, huge, and she was a pistol packing African Choctaw woman, and I don't know what kind of music she listened to because. I never heard her listen to music. The only record that I know that she had was a White Man's Heaven is a Black Man's Hell by Louis Farrakhan, and I gave that to her. And when she passed away, she was living in Arcadia, Louisiana, where I was born. We found that record, and she didn't have any. She had worn it out, But she and I met my great grandmother, who was part Choctaw. She was jet black and had so-called, I'll put this in quotes, good hair. And I met her. I never heard her speak, but that whole the whole question of I think African people have been. Once again, it's a whole question of European control over African creativity.
And the other thing that's come out is the question, Columbia Records records the black females like Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith first. And they, according to Angela Davis, they were the real rebels that really busted open, just totally dismantled social norms and, unleashed a kind of rebellious sexuality, that was really unstoppable. For Angela Davis, that's the roots of black feminism in a lot of ways in the U.S. And that story, needs to come out. And, we got to, I think one thing I'm interested in, looking back at those origins, and it kind of takes us back to folk, country blues, I suppose, but also jazz. And that's just a history that I think we have to excavate again and again, including Otis, this Caribbean connection, and the Trinidadian and Barbadian, Jamaican, and that whole, Caribbean side of blues, the Latin side of blues has really been, in my words, kind of repressed, especially after the blues invasion from the rock world, it becomes somehow blues becomes like centered in the U.S. and then maybe Britain now. But then, really behind that is this Caribbean element that gets kind of pushed to the side, or, now you have blues bands that will do a Latin blues, minor, your one Latin tune. But actually, there's a huge world of Latin Caribbean music and blues that was totally part of the music in the 30s, 40s, and into the 50s. But it kind of, I think it becomes sidelined. And
well, who was really a blues aficionado was Bob Marley. He had the song "Talking Blues," which was he took the line "Cold ground was my bed last night, so rocks my pillow too." That's That's on his song, Talking. That's how it opens up Talking Blues. That's straight from Lightning Hopkins.
Yeah.
Well, don't forget that W.C. Handy, when he writes in Father of the Blues about the song St. Louis Blues or St. Louis Blues, he talks about the tangena section of it, the tango section of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right?
And what's the brother's name? Jelly Roll Morton talked about the Latin tinge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I also wanted to say, Elaine wrote a great little comment. I wanted to throw this out, make sure we get it out on the airwaves here, that we got to be sure to check out Pura Fé, who is a Tuscarora from North Carolina, but who now lives in Beauval, Saskatchewan. Check it out, www.purafé.com. I believe I saw her on that Rumble documentary, no? Yeah, she's just amazing. Well, you know, everyone, it's 6:11, and we've gone over our time in some ways. I've tried to take some questions from our audience. It seems like we've pretty much exhausted them. We have another comment about the neglected female British blues influencers, Ottilie Patterson, and alongside the first African American blues visitors to the UK, Sister Rosetta, Big Bill, Muddy, and so on, toured with the Stones. You know, exactly. I mean, these are just, I guess maybe we can end it here, you know, thinking about these many rivers, you know, many trails converging around the blues, around basically emancipatory movements, and coming together, talking about the blues. And I really want to say thank you to all of you, and thanks, Adam, for putting all that time into your book. It's really going to be read widely, and it'll give a lot of us something to think about and something to critique.
Well, let me just say something else. I'm going to join with all my panelists here. I had a chance, as part of the sort of the little research I did, to bring myself up to speed on the Canadian blues scene. Of course, one thing I did was just Google Canadian blues, gives you the Wikipedia page, and I saw a whole bunch of white guys. I got nothing against them. But what I would say is, if you want power to the people, by God, you ought to go to Wikipedia. And Elaine, I want to see your face there, and I want to see Rez Bluez. I think Rez Bluez may have shown up there. But that's what, first, representation. I'd be the first one to say, and I know, I mean, Steve Strongman was sort of a pal when I was up there the one time. I've known Carlos Del Junco. He was not mentioned, I don't think. But Susie Vinnick just blew me away when I saw her. So I love the Canadian blues musicians that I've crossed paths with, and I found Diana Braithwaite and Chris Whiteley, and Dawn Tyler Watson. It's really good to make the acquaintance of some of these extraordinary talents. But I want to see them on that Wikipedia page. So I'm charging anybody in the audience here, you want to go and rewrite that page a little bit and get a few other photos up there. And a little more stories,
Derek
right?
Brother should be up there. Crystal Shawanda should be up there.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And could I say one other thing? I don't want to cut anybody. Could I say one other thing?
Yeah.
Don Cherry, who was tight with Ornette Coleman. Don Cherry went to John C. Fremont High School, and Jane Cortez, the same high school as Jane Cortez. I wanted to say that the bluesologist Jane Cortez,
yep.
Boots Riley, and Gil Scott Heron, they consider themselves a bluesologist. But Don Cherry is from Oklahoma, and he is of African and First Nations or indigenous. And I think we all should definitely listen to his music because his music is what we're talking about. It's an amalgamation of indigenous black music from America. He lived in Sweden, and he spent some time. I don't know if he went to Africa, but he's definitely influenced by. He's a walking. He's example A of what this whole thing is all about.
Yeah, man. And all the hip hop producers loved his stuff too in the '90s. You know, they were going to his records too.
Well, his daughter is Nina. His stepdaughter is Nina Cherry, who works with has recorded with Youssou N'Dour out of Senegal.
Right. Oh, I didn't know that. So Eagle Eye Cherry is also Okay.
Eli, that's his son, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, we should wrap it up here. I want to say thanks, Julian. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Otis. Thank you, especially Adam. And Huma, thank you for organizing this thing for the Toronto Blues Society. Thanks to the Toronto Blues Society. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And hopefully we'll see all of you in reality.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. I just wanted to say maybe just one really quick question before we go and wrap up. I just wanted to ask you, like, if you all like to mention maybe how people can follow you and your future works and on social media. Maybe if you all like to mention very briefly.
I'm trying to think. There's so many different ways, I suppose. I don't know. I have a YouTube channel, a couple of YouTube channels, and Modern Blues Harmonica. Just Google my name and there'll be something that'll come up. I could give my email address, but we don't want to do that, do we? It's easy to I'm easy to find and easy to suss out. So, yeah.
Julian?
JulianTaylorMusic.ca. That's where everything is. And I'm still trying to figure out whether I'm a blues musician, a folk musician, a soul singer. I don't know. I'm just a Black Indian songwriter. So there you go.
Elaine?
It would be through, it hasn't been updated lately, but my husband's website, murrayporter.ca.
Great. Murray Porter. And of course, Rez Bluez. We got it.
Rez Bluez. Yes.
Rez Bluez and murrayporter.ca. And Otis, you got a blog, or a website?
Yeah, and also have a radio show. I'm on every Sunday from 2 to 4 on Black Power 96 from St. Petersburg, Russia. St. Petersburg, Florida.
I'd like to see you get your radio show in Russia. That sounds pretty good to me. Yeah.
Well, one of the guys in our organization, the leader of the African People's Socialist Party, has been to Russia, and he's very popular over there.
That sounds good. We should hope that maybe they can influence Vladimir Putin or something. Get him to. Good news.
Well, I don't know if Vladimir. I think Vladimir and Omali Ishitella, I don't know if they're on the same page. I think the opposition kind of likes Chairman Omali Ishitella. I don't know. Vladimir is he's a different kind of a brother.
Yeah, right. Exactly. All right, guys. Well, I'm really grateful, and hopefully we can talk on the phone at least soon.
Yeah, thank you all. I just want to mention all the references today in this conversation that was mentioned. Now they're all posted on Facebook comment section as well as on Zoom right now. I'll probably try to gather them all and put under the event discussion post as well, just because there were a lot of references. So hopefully that will be maybe better for the folks who missed this conversation as well. The recording will be up on the TBS YouTube channel on Monday, so you will still have a chance to watch this again. And I just want to thank you all, obviously to Ken and Adam and Elaine, Julian, Norman. This was, I think, really, really so useful for everyone, as far as I can see from the comments as well. And we will be back as TBS next Wednesday with an album premiere of the Swinging Blackjacks. And next Friday, Elaine already mentioned, but we will have our last episode for the Rez Bluez 25th anniversary celebration, featuring Josh Miller and the Pappy Jones Band. You can find all of these information on our Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, all the media channels. So hope you enjoy the conversation, and otherwise, I think we all wish you a happy weekend.
Thank you very much.
Be safe, everyone.
Adam, I'll give you a call soon.
Thanks, guys. It was really nice to see everyone in chat.
Thank you, Julian.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Otis. Thanks,
Thanks,
Elaine.
Julian. Thanks, Elaine. Thanks.